going to be punished because they wanted to try and socialize this out of kids' minds, particularly at a young age. Do you remember what the picture was? Okay, so the kid that had the gun, and this was Kyle, and it said me over Kyle, and then if he was pointing the gun at Oxa, it had Oxa's name, and it looked like he was shooting Oxa. And then, in fact, he not only drew this and put the name on there, but he gave it to Oxa as she was getting on the bus. And some of y'all said, hey, this is just a kid being a kid. This is just creativity. Some of y'all said, wait a minute, no. This is a threat when you put somebody's name on it and you go out of your way to give it to them when you consider all the school shootings that are going on. The Catholic school article is in the video, and there should be a pretty good explanation of that in there. So I'm not going to deal very much with that. If you're in the 9 o'clock class, and I want to make sure that I'm clean on this, nobody else has this. Y'all had the Corman visit, so make sure 9 o'clock people that you go over those notes, because y'all are a day behind on federalism, and go over that article, because you got that article that nobody else did, about the scanning of the cars. And the article itself has got some facts on it, and then, of course, the write-up with Corman has got some things. I think there's at least a letter grade of multiple choice questions about the Corman visit. There's 5 for 10 points, so make sure that you take a good look at that. For the Constitution articles, and this is where they started to back up, do y'all have any questions about these?
The land grab is the one.
What was the land grab article? Do y'all remember what eminent domain is? Go ahead.
I don't specifically remember what eminent domain was, but the land grab article was the whole thing where the government, or rather, somebody wanted to establish a bunch of hotels into an area, an impoverished area, and a lot of the people didn't want to move, and there was a court case brought up, to the fact that we don't want to leave our homes. This is the land we bought up. We're not gonna give you this for especially the discounted shield price that you're giving us.
That's a beginning of an answer. And now let me make sure, be as specific as you can. Eminent domain, if you remember, is the idea that the government can pay you what a reasonable person would pay for your property, force you to sell it in order to do something for the public good, like a road or like a park, for example, these kinds of things. Well, in this instance, the developers were trying to use eminent domain, like you said, to knock down a poorer neighborhood, poorer group of homes, to build shopping malls, restaurants, office space, luxury condominiums, hotels, these kinds of things. And they were going to displace the folks that live there. Now remember, if you're doing something for the public good, everybody drives on a road or everybody can go to a park. But not everybody can shop or eat or live in some of these luxury things. How did they say that this would benefit the public? Do you remember? Go ahead.
I think they said that those people, they were going to move out, put something left.
They did say that, but how would they say that this would benefit the community to use eminent domain? Go ahead.
Didn't they say that it was going to bring more jobs too?
Jobs. They said this was going to create jobs. They said this was going to raise tax revenues. They said this was going to lead to better fire protection and police services and roads and schools and all of these kinds of things. In other words, they're basically saying, look, there's a lot of stuff that we can do with the money that we gain. So we're going to force you to sell, we're going to build these new things, and then we're going to have some of the best services in the area. Now, with all of that in mind, and this was in Connecticut, by the way, a very, very small state, what ended up happening? Did the Supreme Court agree? They did. The Supreme Court agreed. Have they built the malls and the hotels and things? No, they're still fighting this, and this is going on 15 or so years ago now. So kind of keep that in mind as you look at this. The article doesn't say that. It does say that the Supreme Court said they could take it, but they still haven't successfully won yet over the folks in the blighted area. What other questions have you got from the articles? Does this mean we can leave?
Could you quickly go over assault on powers?
Assault on powers was really, really quick. And what was nice about this one is that this one was dealing with just a very specific explanation of separation of powers. And I'll blow this up right quick, and bear with me because this is running just a little bit slow. But this was the article going back. This was the article that was saying that you needed 2 out of the 3 branches of government. And it was the first full indented paragraph. The Constitution is based on the simple but elegant notion that checks and balances require that all important government actions require concurrence of at least 2 branches of government. Enacting a law, action by President and Congress, searching or arresting a person, request by the executive with approval by the judiciary, imprisoning a person, executive prosecution and judicial conviction, signing a treaty or going to war, require that the President and the Congress agree. So basically the gist of this, and I had said in class, if Barack passed health care, well, that was the Congress passing it, the President signing it into law. The next president coming in cannot just rip it up, but the Congress would have to revoke it. And Trump, when he came in, issued executive orders for travel bans. Well, the next president that comes in, because that's only one of the 3, can ignore the travel bans if they so choose. So having 2 of the 3 is a really big deal. If you're going to define separation of powers and checks and balances, and I know we just went over that in the last couple of days, what I would ask you, make sure that you've got examples of checks and balances and separation of powers, and some of these could fall within that to be sure. But this was a quickie, and this one is not going to be an essay. What other questions have you got about the articles? Yeah. Oh, what do you have a question about?
1808.
What was 1808? We talked about 3/5 with slaves. The other provision, well, one of the other provisions that we dealt with was 1808.
States could send back, I think, slaves that got out of the southern states.
Fugitive slave clause is that one. The idea that you would have to return escaped slaves. But what was 1808? Go ahead.
1808 was they were given 20 years, so from 1789 to 1808 to get rid of their slaves, or until they could stop. They were up.
What stopped in 1808?
Slave trade.
The international slave trade. From 1789 to 1808, states were free to continue to participate in the international slave trade. The Constitution, there was a debate that they could have ended slavery at the very beginning, but that would have been taking property in those terms in that time, so they didn't do it because they had just fought a war with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or property. So what they did is they tried to ban the international slave trade, with the thought being that if we ban the slave trade, gradually the slaves will die off and slavery will go away. What actually ended up happening?
They started trading at faster paces and getting as much as they could, so that eventually they wouldn't have to use the international slaves.
Yeah, they accelerated slavery to levels that we had never seen, the importation of slaves, and ultimately the slaves themselves, they began to trade amongst themselves, the states did, rather than depend on the international slave trade. Ox, I think I had seen your hand.
Yeah, I was just gonna make sure they is Southern.
Say what now?
They is Southern.
Yeah, these would have been the slavehold. Any state could have done it, but these would have been predominantly the slaveholding states, yeah.
What
Yes.
years did you say it went on from?
1789 to 1808. So Arona at the beginning said that they had 20 years. The South was so dependent upon slavery, or the slave-holding states were so dependent upon slavery, that in fact they gave them 20 years to kind of wean themselves off. They only accelerated it. It only got worse. Go ahead, Jen.
So were they saying that the international slave trade had to end after 1808, or in 1789 when they passed it, they said, okay, now the international slave trade is...
In 1789, they said the international slave trade has 20 more years, and it will end in 1808. And like I said, if you just subtract 1808 and 1789 from it, it doesn't look like it adds up to 20 years, but if you count it on your fingers, it does. And that's what they're saying. You got 20 years to wean yourself off this institution, and then after that, no more. Well, when they imported so many, they didn't need this international. They could just trade it interstate. So that's that. Other article questions while they're posted? Webcams, of course, dealing with privacy and property. you know, there aren't a lot of numbers that are going to be on this exam, but the webcam deals with, you know, like length of the video clips and when the video clips would be, you know, enacted, you know, what would trigger it in the car. It makes mention of where they would be sent. It also makes mention of how much better people drove at the end of that year with the amount of emails that were sent back to parents, the videos sent back to parents. So make sure that you're comfortable with these terms or these ideas. Social media, y'all remember Anthony Albanese, right?
Yeah.
What were some of his lyrics? Oh, baby.
Well, like he was threatening to kill someone, but like he wasn't.
Threatening to kill his ex-wife. Do you remember what he said?
Something about I see your body dripping on the ground.
Till I see your body dripping on the ground. Something like that.
Very gory sound.
What other things, what other threats did he give? I'm gonna go shoot up an elementary school, he said. I'm not gonna rest till your body is a mess, soaked in blood and dying. Remember that one, talking about his wife? Remember anything else? Yeah, it took all the strength I had not to turn that bitch ghost. Yeah, you remember that? Make sure that you're familiar with some of these lyrics because the specificity of the lyrics really help if you wanna get some points. And there's a link for this. There's also ultimately the article. Anthony Albanese, he was convicted. Y'all remember how many months he got in prison?
He got 4 years.
Believe it was a little bit less than 4 years.
18?
44.
Say what?
I thought it was 18 and then it said
18 years. 12 years. No, it wasn't that long. Look up how long he said. These are some of the details that are the difference between a really good answer and one that's not as good. Make sure that you know how long he was convicted for. When he went to the Supreme Court, did they uphold his conviction?
No.
They didn't. Do you remember why he wasn't convicted for threatening his wife or threatening the FBI agent or threatening to shoot up a school?
I think you said it was their evidence of him doing any of those things, and he said there was some lyrics.
They found no evidence to suggest that he was really getting ready to do these things that he was mentioning. And do you remember what he said, why he wrote these lyrics? It was therapeutic. I'm writing these lyrics because they're therapeutic for me. They're helping me deal with issues because I've just recently divorced my ex-wife. A cynic or maybe a realist would argue, wait a minute, you are threatening your wife and threatening the FBI agent and threatening to shoot up a school. This should not be protected speech. But the court said there was no reason to suspect that he could actually pull these things off because they found nothing there when they went and they met with him. So ultimately, Anthony Albanese was cleared of that conviction. Anything else you got up here? Who has the power to declare war? Congress and Congress alone. And everybody always seems to miss that one. I don't know why. We talked a little bit about the social media. Make sure that you're comfortable because there's actually 3 articles that's on miscellaneous porn. One is revenge porn. And that was dealing, if you remember, with laws to make it illegal to be able to share these images. And this was California. One was, of course, the digital remastering of porn that effectively would make somebody who was of age look significantly younger. In the court, doesn't matter if you're trying to make somebody appear older or younger, digital remastering is not legal. And then the last one that's down here that maybe you forgot about, remember Melissa Nelson. You remember what happened to Melissa Nelson? Say what now?
She got fired because she was too attractive.
Yeah, Melissa Nelson was fired because she was irresistibly attractive. There's an article and a link from Melissa Nelson, so don't forget about the article and the link. And then there were 2 articles. Now, 9 o'clock class in chapter 3, y'all only had the Oklahoma article. But 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, y'all had the Oklahoma article dealing with abortion, and you had the Arizona article dealing with immigration. Okay, so if you're in the 10 or the 11, both of those 2 articles. And let me say this, okay, if we have not gone over an article that might be on a page with other articles, I can't test you on that. But when you study the articles, consider how much time we spend on them. Because the more time we spend on them, I'm not going to try and trick you with what I put on the exam. I mean, the stuff that we spent the most time on, you're going to see. I will try and trick you with how I put it on there. And if you take a look at the quiz, you'll see that some of those questions can be a little bit tricky with the use of your names and different things like that. So kind of keep that thought